Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the end of the world here in Ushuaia in Argentina. Also, forgive my spectacles, as I often say to folks, sometimes in poor Spanish. I am, after all, 53 years old, and my eyes, especially this one, are problematic. In fact, I'm hoping to visit an eye doctor maybe several times before I leave South America. So here, leaning in to see your comments and arrivals, I need my glasses. Let me just have a look here as I've been away staring at my computer. So cool to see these names popping up. I'm learning to use the software. Lauren, so cool to have you here. Thank you. Kathleen from upstate New York. Lauren's in Colorado, and Brad is taking care of the space that he kindly lets me stay in. And folks may know that I spend a lot of time in Wilton, New Hampshire, and Bradford, is my dear friend, is here with us. And he also, by the way, was the one that encouraged me to have a Facebook Live session. I want to thank him for that. Robbie is as close, forgive me, Robbie, she's as close to a sponsor as I've had on this journey. She's in South Florida. Thank you so much, Robbie, for all you did on the tour. And since I'm mentioning sponsorship, I'll let you all know that the biggest, basically corporate sponsor I had was a 40% discount from a clothing, etc. manufacturer called Sportful. Very grateful I got a discount from them because their equipment is very expensive, but also the highest quality. I wore their yellow and black bicycle kit, as we call it, a jersey and a bib in combination, until they were annihilated. And I had 4 sets. I left with 2 and rendezvoused with 2 more sets in Texas, and ultimately abandoned them in Argentina and bought kits from Pave, which you can partially see hanging in the background. Oh yeah, they're directly behind my head. For what it's worth, I really love the Pave clothing as well. And the bib, the winter, or at least the autumn fall bib, was critical for my success and ultimately arriving through the winter here to Ushuaia. How did I get on that? Oh, yes. That was the biggest sponsorship I had. So I just want to say here, as people are popping in, those of you who made donations as individuals, those made a big difference in my comfort. It reduced my concern to essentially zero when it came to keeping a little bit of dinero, a little bit of cash flowing into the otherwise outward flowing cash. So thank you again so much. For many of you donated to Climate Zero's fundraiser for the trees, and I will certainly get back to that. But many of you also donated through my PayPal and Venmo accounts, donations for me personally. Very kind. And Robbie was among the top contributors for sure. She was in essence a sponsor. Thank you so much, Robbie. And Doug too contributed. Thank you, Doug. It's so cool. Doug's here from Fort Collins. He followed me every step of the way. Eventually he picked up and followed me every step of the way. This doesn't scroll so well, huh? Here we go. Amelia's here too, my other host in Wilton, New Hampshire. And kindly, her and Bradford both have been tremendous supporters on all of my journeys. They have always encouraged me, etc., to do what I've been doing, and they have expressed from their hearts the desire to see me when I finish, and I can't wait to see them too. Beth Harpin, my buddy from high school, so cool to see you here. It's a privilege to have my friends from the past and the present, of course, always friends in from the rest of my life, however long that goes. I wondered as I went over over Garibaldi Pass if that was the last day of my life on the descent, but I survived it. I'll come back to that topic, hopefully, and Christine's jumping in. Christine, from my experiences on the coast of Maine, there were so many of those years ago in my 20s and 30s. Well, Kent's here too. I couldn't convince Kent to be a moderator, so his lovely wife Anna stepped in, and she's found a solution today. She's going to transfer your questions to Messenger, which I have up on my laptop. So once I get done talking about those, if you didn't see them, I posted some points this morning. Actually never got around to doing it on Instagram, unfortunately. The phone rang, and now in hindsight, I didn't do it. But I have posted some bulleted, highlighted comments and observations that I'm going to talk about here momentarily, all or most of them. And when I finish that, I encourage any questions you might have for two reasons. One, of course, your curiosity, but two, I'm also interested in expanding what it is about my journey that brings an interest to a wider audience. And it may be invisible to me, some of your questions right now, and I suspect you could expand my own thinking about this journey, especially as I recover my ability to think deeply on topics of any type. I think I'm getting more tired, which is what I would anticipate, versus more rested these first few days. And I'm guessing I will go through a period of recovery for weeks as my body releases the fatigue that it's been storing now for months. This has been my experience in the past, and I think this will be an overwhelming fatigue as the days progress. There are so many things I would like to share with you all. As I speak, three more pop into my head, such as how comfortable I am here in Ushuaia in this apartment that you can partially see around me. I want to say hi to a few more people. Alan, thank you so much. You were an amazing follower on I think it was Facebook. Forgive me, Facebook and Instagram sometimes run together. You might have been in both places. He wants to know if I'll get a ride in today. I'm happy to report that I will not be riding the bike today. Primarily, I don't know, some of you, I posted an image to Facebook today, the winter wonderland that is Ushuaia with the big mountains in the background. I will post a different image to Instagram later. The roads are steep in town, it turns out. It's reminiscent of San Francisco on a much smaller scale, and ice and snow prevail, and it's super cold. When I was capturing the images that contributed to the post in Facebook this morning, my fingers needed to be wiggled twice for quite a while to recover the feeling in them, as they otherwise hurt. So no riding today, Alan. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you along. And Colin, wow, you honor me, my friend, by showing up here today. I haven't seen Colin since I was a graduate student in New Brunswick in the early 2000s when I ultimately finished. Very cool to see you here, my friend. Thank you. All right, I'm going to transition to my list. I'll try to keep it simple. These are just some thoughts that truly have come from me personally over the years that I've been now touring on a bicycle. Maybe I'll back up into a little bit of that. I want to make sure I don't miss anything like, hey, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. No, stop. Thanks, Amelia. Cool, thanks. My good friend Andrew Mackey has just popped in. By the way, that's from my truck, and all of my possessions are currently stored, and he's even replaced my battery in the meantime in the truck, so he's done me a great service. Taking care of what is, when people talk about their assets, they're usually, I suppose they're children if they think of them that way. Certainly their property, their home. My asset is a 2002 Tacoma pickup truck. It's very well cared for, but I haven't accumulated a lot of the typical assets in life because of the choices that I've made, and that would bring us down a very long tunnel and story among many rabbits. Some of you would have detected by now that I often refer to the story of Watership Down, the rabbits in that story. It's one of my favorites. So if you hear me say Roo-doo-doo, which is spelled with an H, by the way, I'm referring to cars, including trucks, or cars and trucks and buses, etc. That's what the rabbits referred to them as, in tractors. If you've never read that story, I highly recommend it. It never fails to make me cry, by the way, even though I know the outcome because I've read and listened to it a few times by now. It's a tremendous story, and I think ultimately it contributes to anyone who has a goal to be a good human, which I'll say more about too. Hopefully that's the last bullet. Wonderful, everybody. I hope all of these comments are stored away so I can read each and every one of them. Hi, Ravi. I see, and some people know each other. So Andrew and Robbie were neighbors for many years. So cool. Cool. All right, the first bullet. Here we go. The first thing that comes to mind, a bit lame to put it first, I suppose. I could be more creative if I had a lot more time. The first topic I have on my list is to begin. So, because people are people, I am often asked, what is the most difficult part of your journey? And so far, I think everyone has been surprised when I responded with just a simple one-word answer, or 2 words, to begin. It is my opinion, after I've lost track now, I think I've been bike touring for 10 years, and the first one was very modest, keep in mind, and they grew from there. Renee, so cool to have you along. Renee is the overseer of the property owned by her family, La Suerte, where I planted the 5,000 trees. She was critical. My friends and family and strangers too contributed $5,000 through a GoFundMe, you'll recall. However, Renee's organization also contributed money to make that a reality. Madeiras Conservancy, forgive me, Renee, I haven't said it in so long. Madeiras Rainforest Conservancy, forgive me, shame on me. I've been battling the elements now for so many weeks. There it is, finally rolling off of my tongue again. That conservancy was absolutely critical and contributed some of their own funding to make the 5,000 trees in the ground a reality. And she allocated her entire team to my project, including the kitchen staff. So it goes without saying that I'm indebted and grateful forever to this kind woman. Thank you so much, Renee, for all of that and for joining us today. So when people ask me what's the hardest thing about a journey, I tell them it's to begin. And sometimes I'll tell them a funny story. I'd say, and forgive me, it's cool in here, and as usual, my nose is running. If you haven't seen that in the films, then keep watching. You will. Sadly, my nose likes to go places when it's cold. I set up so I asked them to imagine that they fly to, say, Barcelona wearing only their underwear, or if they prefer, a bathing suit. And I challenged them that if they did that, and their goal was to complete a journey like my Europa 360, Barcelona to Barcelona by bicycle. If you're unaware of that journey that I completed last year, it was 84 days, and I want to say it was around 7,000 miles at the top of my head. I started in Barcelona, eventually arrived to Stockholm and also Helsinki, and then rode south eventually to Croatia, and then began a journey across the Mediterranean, mainland and islands, back to Barcelona. What I suggest to them is if they arrived in that format because they wanted to ride Europa 360, I predict that they could acquire everything they needed to begin the journey and ride through the Pyrenees and on and on. That's because I feel so confident that the hardest part of a journey like Climate Zero or Europa 360 is to begin. It is starting that precludes achievement of a dream in almost all cases. That has been my experience, and that would be my answer, and my advice to anyone who asks would be to just begin. Now, that's a good place to step off into some of these other thoughts, I think. Now, I kept that very brief, which I'm not known for. So I will continue to try to do that as I progress here, to keep it brief. If folks have more questions, they arise about the topics I'm hitting, obviously ask them. Sarah Carr, as I've always known you, with a lovely last name now, because of course you carried on, had some children with a fine young man. It's so nice to see you here this morning. Thank you. Thinking of your parents, of course, always. I miss them. Oh, yeah. Oh, I got to put my glasses on. You're welcome, Bradford. No doubt you have a full schedule today. Well, let me also say that I will not be offended by your departure. Thank you so much for your arrival. It will ground. It will. I will always remember that. So I know it's a long block of time. I'm on here for that long block just to let people come and go that maybe had commitments earlier during the session. Because of my conclusion about how do you begin what is the hardest part of your journey, in part it's given me opportunity to think a lot about reasons and excuses. And only recently, I think it's fair to say that I have concluded, which is a strong word, I realize, but I feel this way, that that reasons for not doing something, often something difficult, if they're analyzed honestly by the individual, almost always turn out to be excuses. Again, I know that for all of us as humans, it could almost be offensive to suggest that your reason may be something that in society we don't celebrate, this concept of an excuse. In fairness to human beings, we live a lot of delusion generated by our mind. What appears to be truth is, in fact, a delusion. One moment. So clearly, when we fail to begin, the reason we do so is for a reason or reasons. Your challenge is to honestly interrogate those when you want to do something difficult, which, by the way, I have done some difficult things physically and mentally, typically on a bicycle. I've also challenged myself in running shoes. For example, last year I ran a trail and ultimately my first marathon completely on my own, suffering terribly on my own that day, because I was curious about what it would feel like to run a marathon. Well, I assure you, it hurts a lot. So I began that journey. So ultimately, now that was really hard. Now, again, I want to come back to everything you might want to do doesn't have to be that hard. But ultimately, if you're not starting something you want to do, I encourage an assessment, an honest look at the reason why you don't begin that difficult challenge. Some of them have nothing to do with, a lot of them have nothing to do with sport. Maybe it's a conversation that you need to have with somebody, even yourself. Now that gets complicated. But ultimately, my analysis has concluded that reasons are almost always excuses. I think that simple point is good to keep in mind, especially when you're struggling to do something difficult. Ultimately, if you put all those reasons aside, for example, you fly to Barcelona in your underwear if you can get through security with the goal of riding in a big loop through Europe, I think you'll actually be successful. Obviously, there's some persistence that comes to mind that must be overcome. My last 2 weeks of climate zero represented that scenario, or is a good example of what I'm referring to there. Beginning was, I think, enormous, but I had to keep going too. But that's a longer discussion, though I will now touch on a few of the, or at least in a moment, some of my, if they're secrets, so be it, I reveal them, but I suspect anybody who's tried to do something difficult and succeeded will fully comprehend what I'm about to describe. Okay, so reasons are excuses and camouflage, I think, as much as it may hurt all of us. This next point, let me see here. Bradford's still weighing in. That's right. I've been invited by Brad, and no doubt Amelia shares his invitation. They're an amazing couple. I've known them for 3 decades, actually. I've probably known Brad longer. And through all of our evolution as people, they're still there supporting me and encouraging me in a way that respects who I am. So these are dear friends. He's invited me to do some writing in Wilton, which would be amazing. The tyranny of false information. I do think we have, and of course, all of us sense it and see it, experience it. But then we return to what we were doing before. And so the problem persists and maybe it expands. So in particular, there are many things I could focus on here, but I'm going to focus only on one part of the inevitable space we find ourselves living in because of this tyranny of false information that persists in our communities, in our countries, in the world. In fact, I discover even folks from Argentina suggesting Buenos Aires, for example, is very dangerous. I would be robbed at gunpoint if I went there, potentially. They may be right, but I wonder if it's the same scenario back that I run into in the US, where I'm told, for example, New York City or Chicago or St. Louis is also dangerous to that extent. But the one piece of this I'll focus on for a couple minutes is fear, because fear obviously is a reason, though it's probably packaged in some other way, why we wouldn't begin our journey. In my experience touring on a bicycle, which has taken me the farthest from the spaces that I know and understand, which by definition, I assume those are safe places, not necessarily. Easy to spin off on a tangent and say, for example, am I in more danger when I'm traveling versus being in the United States? We have so many problems in the US with guns, for example. But anyway, bracket that for another discussion. In my experience, fear is overstated to such an extent that it's to such an extent that I would categorize it as, well, total bullshit, if I was to speak freely, or telling lies, something along those lines. There is truthfully reasons to be aware of your surroundings in traffic, amidst the critters that live in a rainforest and might lay eggs in your back, as I experienced, unfortunately, with botflies. There are true reasons to fear, but most of the time, if you use basic intuition, there is nothing to be afraid of as we move about in spaces that we're not familiar with. But that fear, of course, is embedded for a reason. And that reason is generally it's profitable. The media pulls us into that space and advertises, the folks that pay for that airtime, repeated, very frightening information about the world, which I honestly find disturbing for a lot of reasons. One being the observers of the television and the news, maybe they can convince me otherwise, but from my outside perspective looking in, it appears that they're using that experience as entertainment. And of course, again, that would be very disturbing, that people's unfortunate conclusion or other tragic conclusion, or in general, what we see in the media, which is tremendously sad, is often generally viewed as entertainment. They don't think of it this way, and they express pity and sadness, but they turn the TV off and they go on to the next thing in life. We are all selfish beings, myself included, and so that's the outcome. If the outcome instead was up in arms until we found a solution, peaceful arms, I hope, then this media engine of delivering only the worst, only the most devastating, whenever they can get it, information would be actually quite utilitarian. It would be quite useful. But back to this concept of fear. In my experience, there is almost nothing to truly fear. If you let the fear go and you instead go into the unknown, what actually happens is you flourish in new information. If you open yourself up to those opportunities, which they are, you discover that that is a privileged space, and you grow as a person in many ways. So I hope fear will not stop people from going and doing the things that they might be thinking about or have been for a long time. Which brings me to strangers or friends you just haven't met yet. If there's any statement that I've made in my life that I'm proud of, that may be it, and it may be the only, I think, intelligent observation I ever make. Strangers or friends you just haven't met yet. Again and again, rather than finding myself in danger on my journeys, I found myself among friends that a moment before were strangers. So when asked, for example, how they contribute to my success, I'll step now into, I think, an item that's farther down the list. For example, you may recall when I rolled into Mexico, I did so with anxiety. That anxiety was generated by people close to me, whom I love, and they had my best outcomes in mind. They didn't want me to come to a quick end before my tour in Central and South America essentially began. So the discussion was even skip Mexico. And I thought at that time that it was reasonable to suggest that. And I would say still, depending on the circumstances, I would still accept that as a reasonable conclusion. I went into, of course, the media in Mexico. We don't have to discuss that for long in the U.S. Clearly, they don't look well upon that country as far as safety. Some things have happened, and a discussion about luck and bad luck would be relevant, I think, in those cases. Some people have gotten very unlucky in Mexico, and their demise came quickly thereafter. Strangers. My journey through Mexico was made possible by the kindness of strangers, which now many of them I'm still in touch with. My friend Bradford, who's here and typing comments, he has a many years background associated or even in the military, so a military background. And I've listened to him talk about the value of collecting intelligence in a foreign land. And when I was preparing to depart, he was encouraging me to go to the State Department, read that material, etc. And just in general, talking about information gathering. I took his suggestion over the border and I transformed it into my own as far as how was I going to do that. I didn't spend much time on the government website, truthfully, but I began to communicate as best I could, which my Spanish when I arrived to Mexico was, let's call it 0. And it improved vastly after Guatemala when I went to school for 2 weeks, but it was never great, and it still isn't great, unfortunately. So many difficulties with the tour itself made it hard for me to study on my own. But anyway, I communicated with strangers. Many of them I'll never know, see, never knew their name. And they were the ones who told me what to do and where to go and what not to do. So the contribution of strangers to my journey cannot be overemphasized. In their absence, I may have camped in a space in the dark, obviously, where I shouldn't have. I may have gone through a town, I may have gone through a region that I shouldn't have. And there was ample opportunity for screwing up in Mexico as I met more people. And I was going straight and they said, no, go right, and then left, and et cetera. And I'm talking about big, wide open spaces. So back to the original point, strangers are friends you just haven't met yet. I think that's valuable for communicating in life in general, your neighbor, folks in another country that are on the news, thinking of them as friends that you just haven't met yet. That's worked so well for me that I'm convinced that it's the truth. And on my journey through Mexico, strangers, many of them now friends, as I said, are why I was able to have the experience that I did. And it was amplified thanks to them in a positive way. Okay, what next? Okay. Yeah, and also I'll just add, you're never alone. This is one of the, I get asked, are you lonely in that vast open space, that cold space, when I rode 147 miles to Rio Gallegos in Mexico? In Argentina, the double L is a J, Rio Gallegos. I was not lonely. Well, maybe that day a little bit. That was a big, wide open space. But because strangers or friends you just haven't met yet, I feel comfortable much more than the average person when I am among them. I interact with them as if I already knew them. I see now in reflection and hindsight. Let's step into what am I thinking on the bike. Let me first say that, because many of you will not know, I do not wear headphones of any sort, in part because I have a conservation background, ecology, and marine birds in particular. Pájaro in Spanish is bird. And so I'm interested in the natural world. However, I also don't listen because the distraction, I think, has serious implications. Your demise, and could be ultimately part of that, though that's rarely the case. But you may get injured to some degree, which is in fact debilitating. So I do not wear headphones. However, I do often put an earplug in my left ear, and I do that because I have learned in life that I am high sensitive, a bit on the spectrum, to sound and also light, uh, and all of my senses, in fact, are often on a red line or just below it. So a loud sound to me is uncomfortable. A very loud sound for me is debilitating. So a Harley Davidson goes by, which is advertised as saving lives, and I truly suffer as that machine goes by. So safe to say, I don't approve of loud machines just for the sake of loudness, even if they think they save lives. I don't totally disagree with the sound in the conclusion, but I do feel strongly that it's irresponsible, not because it's uncomfortable for me, but because of what it does to everything around it. We now know that sound plays a role in the disruption of our ecosystems. The critters that rely on communication through sound, which is most of them, are affected by that nonsense. So anyway, bracket that, another complaint from Andre. So returning to my original original question, what am I thinking about on the bike? So the reason people ask me that, so all that just said, is they know I don't wear headphones, but I wanted to also admit that I wear an earplug, but not on my opposite ear, so only on the traffic side of the road. It's not ideal, I would add before moving on, because I have had vehicles next to me moving quickly that I never heard. This can happen when I'm also dealing with wind noise. That's another reason I put an earplug in. By the way, the wind noise is constantly bombarding my central nervous system, and by putting an earplug in the ear, I'm less tired at the end of the day. And on a long journey, of course, that's important. So what is in my mind? It's an excellent question. What am I thinking about? I must be thinking if I'm not listening to a podcast or music for 284 days and 17,300 or so miles. Someone can post the number, I've forgotten already. The total journey, including the prelude, was 17,000 miles and change. I must be thinking about a lot of stuff. Okay, so it's true. The obvious one first. Excuse me. I am problem solving and planning, obviously. I'm not route finding typically. Let me insert here that all of my days are informed beforehand by building the route that I will follow that day. So I bring up the route that I built on my laptop on my GPS, which sits in front of me. It's a GPS made for bicycle, by the way. It's called a Garmin 1030. It sits in front of me, and I follow the red line, leaving out the details during the day. So I'm not route finding most of the time. Sometimes I have to road closures, and that way I'm focused more on staying alive, in essence, especially in places like Panama, where I was riding along the Pan American Highway, which I rode elsewhere too. But the Pan American Highway, the 3 or 4 days going into Panama City, was an absolute liability. That I survived that, to me, is maybe not quite a miracle, but if I was ever in danger on the journey, that was a highlight for sure. So I wasn't compromised by route finding during that dangerous time. Also dangerous has been many miles in Argentina because they build the roads they build the roads with a beautiful shoulder, by the way, but it's not paved. And I added that little bit because when I got to the Grand Island of Tierra del Fuego, I rode that shoulder, which was frozen for many miles. It was actually quite useful because it's gravel here, and it allowed me some traction when the road was completely frozen and it was dark, and I was trying to get to Cerro Sombrero, the first community that I slept in south of the Magellanic Strait. Back to the question, what am I thinking? Okay, so all that normal stuff is obvious. My goal in life, my overarching goal, and it's because I recognized a far from perfect first 50 years on planet Earth. Here I am, 53, especially the learning period of my 20s and 30s when I made my most egregious errors, in my opinion, mistakes involving myself and other people. By the time I was in my 40s, I was thinking about the concept of being a good human. A good human. And by the way, somebody said that to me at the end of a bike race, not far from Durango, a few years ago. I had these ideas in mind, and he said, good human. He was expressing his desire to be a good human. And I realized, okay, that's a nice way to package what it is I've been searching for. My overarching goal in life is to be a good human. I know I haven't achieved it. I'm still flawed to an extent that I do not accept the label as good human. I will among my friends who love me and strangers. I will not argue with them, but for myself personally, I recognize an enormous amount of work that has to be done. James, thank you so much for the congratulations. Forgive this little step to the right for a moment. I arrived to James, his hotel in, James, type the name of your town there, would you? And I paid for the room, and later I came back into the lobby, and James was there. And he listened to my story. I was on a bike tour. He immediately refunded all my money, and he's let me stay in his hotel for free ever since. Those are the people. So that's it. So like the town in India, it looks like Delhi, but I think in New York they pronounce it Delhi. Good Americans there, messing with a proper word. So cool to see you, James. Thank you for dropping in. And my Aunt Lynn, you honor me, Auntie, for showing up here today. Thank you so much. And Meredith, of course, her contribution to my life was massive, and it'll always be so. Her patience is incredible. Her lack of selfishness is something all of us could learn from. Thank you, Meredith. Amazing to see you here. Thank you so much. What I am thinking about on the bicycle is almost whenever I'm not in the logistics space is an interrogation of me. I'm studying what comes from my mind and how I respond to it. I spend hours interrogating myself. And interrogation sounds like an uncomfortable thing. It's not uncomfortable for me. It's, if I don't mention this after, I'll say it now. I personally get pleasure, you should know this about me, from experimentation on myself. This is part of the way I learn in life. So I fasted for 5 days for many reasons about 2 years ago. I haven't fasted since or before, in part because it's a very healthy thing to do, leaving out the details. You really should look into the value of fasting. I learned so much about me during that process. So on the bicycle, going the distance that I did, I knew that it would be an experiment. I would go into a space where I had never been before. 284 days, it turned out, over 17,000 miles. I think the total country count was, someone can correct me, the numbers are on Facebook, was it 15 or 16? Most of them I'd never been to before. What happens to your central nervous system? What do you think about? What causes you to suffer? Can you even function after that many miles? After riding through Peru, only a mountain route, no coast. Peru was brutal. I cannot stress that enough. You cannot imagine, only if you go or have a similar experience, I assure you, what happened in Peru over 37 days of riding. It was the hardest challenge of my life. It was harder than the Patagonia region, but the Patagonia region came last. Where do I go as far as my mental state on a journey of that magnitude? That was part of my experiment on this journey. I wanted to see what would happen. And so, interrogation of my thinking and modification of my response is a large part of how I spend my time on a bicycle when I'm not going through the simple logistics of where am I going to stay, fixing equipment and flat tires, and on and on. And ultimately, my goal, my selfish goal, which I described, because I think this journey should be much more than about me, which is why I'm so happy so many people came into the space in social media, all of you, for example, to be part of the journey. If I can make a difference in a positive way to another human being, then that's an investment that will continue, I think, to make a similar change when I'm long gone. And more, not just the interactions, but the message. And my journey was climate zero, of course. Climate zero, 54 north to 54 south by bicycle. The climate zero being the most important part, the second part being about Andre experimenting with his physical and mental self, and a cool title, I think, and a cool goal, Cartwright to Ushuaia, both at 54. Climate zero, plant enough trees to zero your 52 year. I was 52 when I left in August. I was 53 2 days ago when I finished. Enough trees to zero my 52-year carbon footprint. That is the piece that's most important to get people thinking, I hope, about, well, if Andre can plant 5,000 trees and find the solution, because remember, when I left Maine, I said, I'm going to plant the trees, and anyone who asks, well, where? My response was, I have ideas, none of them are solid. In essence, I have no idea. But thanks to Renee and Madeiras Rainforest Conservancy that came along through messaging, popped up one day, it happened. If you begin your dream, I can't say that there aren't failures. And Scott and Wilson failed on their way back from the South Pole. It does happen, but generally, the early Arctic explorers. And Shackleton didn't make it either because he got stuck in the ice. Forgive me, the curiosity about Antarctic explorers, that goes way back. But chances are, if you begin, my first point in this discussion, you will have your dream, I like to say. So those are all the reasons for the journey. But I have my own selfish reasons too. And the primary one is to be a better human, to ultimately be a good human. And I'm searching always for not only ways to achieve that in my interactions, but also within myself. And that's why the interrogation in part of my mind, we are the most cruel to ourselves. And I once heard or read a statement, and I will depart this bullet after I say this, that it really gave me pause. That was, you are only willing to be abused, mental, physical, etc., just a little less than you abuse yourself. So you will accept someone that just below that threshold abuses you the way you just above that abuse yourself. It made a lot of sense to me looking back on all of my experiences in life. But imagine if that's true, the terrible conclusion it actually is about the human condition. And I think ultimately, I think it is real. Okay, the next point here. Okay. Let me say something about the peaceful warrior. There is a book, of course, The Peaceful Warrior. I think that's the exact title. So let me be honest about that. And I've read it and I enjoyed it. However, I would be more likely to recommend, well, you could read that too, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And forgive the terrible pronunciation. If I could get Renee on here speaking, which I don't know how to do, she could clean that up for me. And if you post the name of that book and the author in the comments, that'd be cool. The peaceful warrior concept certainly is embedded and maybe even stated in that book. So this is relevant to how I survive and what I do on my long bicycle journeys. And then I'm going to transition into how I overcome short-term, mega challenging, so numerous inputs, very dangerous parts of my journeys, such as navigating multiple lane roundabouts, traffic circles in Sofia in Bulgaria on my journey from Scotland and Ireland to Istanbul. Istanbul, by the way, is on the Bosphorus, which is not a river, but it is a connection between the Black Sea and the larger Mediterranean. And it is considered the conclusion of the European subcontinent. So on that journey, my goal was to cross the entire European subcontinent, which I did, and it was an incredible journey through places like Bulgaria and Serbia and Bosnia and Croatia, places that I had reason to think might be dangerous, but I discovered only friends there, honestly. Some amazing stories, including riding my bicycle into Sarajevo, which another book, The Cellist, I believe it's The Cellist of Sarajevo. Someone help me with that if I've blown it. That is well worth reading. To be a better human, read The Cellist of Sarajevo. And Anna, fix that book title if I've messed it up. Thank you. So I keep getting distracted by so many thoughts. The peaceful warrior. Okay. So I love this concept. This is I said that I interrogate myself. In essence, what I'm speaking of is being my own inner peaceful warrior. So let me clarify that a bit better. When we think of the topic of a warrior, we're thinking bloodshed. Authors like Ruiz, he is encouraging us to think of the warrior as the person struggling to be a better human. The peaceful warrior is interrogating his own flaws in thought and response. To be a peaceful warrior is not to be aggressive. That's an important point. Unfortunately, it's necessary in the world, and my friend Brad could clarify why that's true for me. Unfortunately, thanks to him and others, I've never had to be in that situation. But generally, aggression is not necessary. He also understands that from other experiences in his life. The peaceful warrior concept, I think, is very useful for all of us as human beings. It is an invitation to be your very best, it turns out. So let me expand on that briefly. Imagine if you could amplify all of your birth-given senses so that they were all more or less at their highest tuning. So you were at your most perceptive. What would that feel like? The peaceful warrior wants to be able to navigate to that extreme where their senses are dialed to the maximum for the greatest intention. Would it be uncomfortable? That's not my experience. So on my ride into Sofia, Bulgaria a few years ago, I found myself in more than one, on an interstate, as we call them in the United States, Estados Unidos, and then in and out of those traffic circles where trolley cars went perpendicular to the main line, so they had some of this going on, and buses and cars and motorcycles and even people were moving, the people not so fast, everybody else quite fast. And my response could have been and would have been earlier in my exploration by bicycle, basically panic. Instead, for some reason that day, I discovered a control of my inner peaceful warrior that I had never accessed before. Importantly, I was able to remain totally calm even as my senses went to maximum. So in essence, I felt the physics around me. This may sound like complete garbage to you, but I assure you, when I am in traffic situations, these tend to be the most dangerous. A lot of people are killed in traffic accidents. If you don't know about that, and you're suggesting that X, Y, or Z are the most dangerous thing you do, you should read about traffic car accidents. And the most dangerous thing most of us do is get into a car. That's just the truth based on the numbers. If you watch my videos of me essentially surfing through tuk-tuks, loads of tuk-tuks in different countries amidst buses and motorcycles and people, as if I was literally gliding through that space peacefully without fear. What you can't see is that I am projecting my inner peaceful warrior. I am elevating my senses to the maximum. And if I am surfing on anything, it is a wave of total awareness. Like I have not achieved outside of those very dangerous situations. It's pleasurable to maximize your awareness of that space. And so if you've ever wondered why I'm going through those traffic situations the way I do, seemingly in great danger, in fact, I am enjoying the ride after an enormous amount of experience and contemplation and refinement. So I would encourage all of you to think about your peaceful warrior, to find that inner peaceful warrior, to nurture it and understand it and develop it so that you too can be aware to that extent when you need to, for example, if you're on a bicycle. But your life too can be affected by the awareness of those resources that you have and many of us never discover. I'm going to skip the chunking. How are we doing for time here? Let me see. Okay, so the first hour has dissolved, so I'm going to try to speed up my comments here. The next 10 minutes to be done with it. It's already a question popping up. Okay, so this hopefully has utility as well. Talking about the concept of peaceful warrior, et cetera, is obviously probably raises more questions than full comprehension, but nonetheless, it's important to me, and I jotted it down as something I might say a few words about. Ah, cool. Your sister is here, Brad. Nice. Thank you, little sister, for dropping in. I am honored by your presence. Rodney, also known as Rodbot, for a costume that he assembled many years ago when I was in grad school. He's a lawyer now, by the way, so he's a very smart dude. Carrie, really cool to see you here. Amazing. Some of the folks that are dropping in, I didn't know were following the journey. There's a lot of silent observers on Facebook, as many of us have discovered by now, I think. Carrie, so cool to see you here. So how do you get from Ecuador to Bolivia? I just pulled that example out of many. Peru, as I said a moment ago, is the hardest part of my journey. I think everyone wants to know what the hardest is. I always want to know the extreme. I get that. Forgive me if it was a longer discussion. Obviously, there's many details that I'm leaving out there, but Peru was, it was okay. It was brutal, as I said, and that full interpretation of that word. How does a man survive or a woman survive Peru also when they're getting sick? So that's the rabbit hole I'll go down. I descended a community from about 10 or 11 or even 12,000 feet. Peru was like this. You go up to 10, 11, 12, 13. I even went to 15,400 feet. And forgive me, I can't do the meters super quickly, but basically divide it by 3 and you have meters. And then you descend to something far lower. It might be 6,000 if you're lucky. And then you climb again back to 10, 11, 12, 13, often 12 and 13, by the way, not often 10, often higher. And then you do it again, 37 days of that. But on this particular occasion, I descended to under 2,000 feet from that elevation. And on my way down, I developed the symptoms of basically food poisoning, a GI bug of some sort. When I got to the podunk, I mean no disrespect there, a very small town, Vicky has dropped in. By the way, she's an amazing hygienist, has her own shop in Fort Collins, Colorado. Thank you for the congrats, Vicky. Amazing to see you here. I go to her 4 times a year. In between my cleanings, I get a quick cleaning. She calls it a spiffy. If you could go see her in Fort Collins, you'd have my envy. I get my teeth cleaned 4 times a year from her in that case. Vicky, please tell your other half that I said hello too. Okay, where was I? Oh yes, so I descended into a desert canyon. It was super hot and now I'm sick. And I arrived to a gas station, and regarding the kindness of strangers, the man said that the former hotel was no longer operational, but he nonetheless made up a room for me anyway. And I went in there and I slept right away in the afternoon and then slept all night. The next day, unfortunately, I was not much better, though I was rested. I managed to ride 40 miles to the next town. I needed to do that because the podunk town really had no resources to keep me essentially alive. So I went to the other town successfully. And by the way, you may recall when I was attached to an IV bag by a small medical clinic, you may recall too that there was a cost and I told them what was going on and that I hadn't planned enough cash to be there for, I think, 4 nights. And they said, that's fine, we're going to give you the bag anyway. The kindness in places like Mexico, in this case, Peru, if you ever thought it wasn't there, I assure you, you're in for a big surprise, because the kindness of strangers knows no limit in my experience. And don't be surprised when you come away with many new friends. I reached that community, and then 3 or 4 days later, I departed nearly out of cash. And 2 days later, I was at 13,000 feet. So I went from under 2 to back to 13. That day, I rode 5 miles short downhill to a plateau amidst massive mountains. I was attacked by 5 dogs, and one bit me on the left leg, and I crashed. I got up off the ground, obviously frustrated, and for the next many hours, I climbed to 15,400 feet, the highest elevation I'd ever been on, while standing on the ground versus in an airplane. My leg hurt the whole way. I stood there in rain, my hands already cold, but smiling. If you see the video, that is a real smile. It was so hard to get to the top of that climb, but when I got there, I feel goosebumps now. It was a moment in my life that I will always cherish. I descended 30 miles off the climb, down a horrendous road. The roads in Peru in the northern half, the main roads, are often dirt and often under construction. The last 10 miles were completely under construction until I finally arrived to a village, and I stayed there for a few nights as well because I had persistent nausea and I couldn't shake it. How did I ride through all of that space, feeling the way that I did? My secret, no secret, I suspect, is to break the challenges that I faced, the massive climbs, into small enough parts that I can mentally accept or overcome them. On the journey coming out of the village where I had the IV bag, it was as far as I could see up the road to the next corner. And I could, for example, on that journey, that first day, in the next 2 days at least, I could stand in my pedals and rotate my pedals only 3 times, and I would collapse back to the seat. Contrast that with my last day on this tour, coming over Garibaldi Pass. If you haven't seen my last film from the road, check it out. I was in an absolute mountain winter wonderland, and honestly, I was intimidated. And in addition, I didn't want to get arrested and then, miss my opportunity to ride that. So I was going as quick as I could. And I was able to stand on my pedals and climb for, well, more than I did. I'd eventually sit down because you should mix it up. But I could climb for 5 minutes standing in the pedals. So I recovered, obviously, but only 3 times. Okay, maybe 2 or 4. I survived those days, and there are many other pinch points on this journey, by chunking. I chunked, as I call it. My method is called chunking. I split the challenges into manageable parts, mental manageable parts, and that's how I persisted, and that's how I ended up here at the end of the world, seemingly a miracle. But in fact, some of my chunks were tiny. On days like those, they were tiny chunks, and I just went on to the next one and the next one. To me, it is a tragedy in part that my journey has come to an end. It's the greatest journey of my life. It's a greater journey than earning a PhD, though I would say that that journey too was monumental. education that I went through, the postdocs after the PhD were also monumental challenges. Nonetheless, this journey of the Americas by bicycle from Cartwright, Labrador at 54 degrees north latitude to Ushuaia at 54 south, it opened up more spaces and forced those spaces to become larger and accommodate more difficult challenges than anything I have ever done before. So it is a tragedy to me that such an opportunity, which, by the way, I am absolutely, I hope, grateful for. I was so fortunate to be a person that got to try, regardless of if I finished or not. I got to try, and that is, it is something to be absolutely grateful for. I lost a friend in my 20s to cancer. He is with me every day, by the way. If you want to know another way that I achieve my goals, and this could make me emotional, it's thinking about the friends in my life that didn't have the opportunity to do that. I take them with me when I do the hard things that I do, and sometimes they are standing there shouting at me to keep going. In Bradford, he's one of those. Moment. Just a moment. Ah. So there is so much reason to be grateful. Unfortunately, the conclusion of the people we love is an opportunity for that. So they too, they come with me. Just one moment. If you can find no other inspiration, remember the people who you love and maybe the people you never met. Feel bad for their families too, because it hurts the same way as it hurt when you lost that person. Don't forget that human beings are not that different. For example, the people walking across the Darien Gap because they want to go to the United States where they don't have to live on a dirt floor. They want the same things that we do, and I think they have a right to it. There should be a process that allows those people to live a comfortable life. I didn't say it because it didn't. Jed, so cool to see you pop in, buddy. Jed is a friend from Colorado. He has amazing stories to tell. I love this man. So I witnessed on my journey an enormous amount of poverty. I rode south as hundreds of people walked up the Pan American Highway past me. It was brutal, carrying everything they owned. I saw children that were truly uncomfortable and their parents trying to negotiate with them to keep them walking up an asphalt road, the Pan American Highway, and it was 114 degrees on my GPS. I wanted to stop and help all of them, but for the most part, I kept going. It was brutal to be in their proximity. As a human, it challenged me deeply, and I still don't know how I totally feel about it. I better make a contribution in life that is significant given that I left them there. So it's a tragedy that my journey is over because I have so much opportunity, but ultimately I also feel good about it, I'll be honest, because I'm exhausted. And also in part, I'm excited to go and see, well, not just in part. I want to see the people I know the most. I want to see my friends, my family. I'm not going, by the way, I will not depart here right away. I think it would be a tragedy to just fly back to the US, one and done and finished, right? So expect, if you follow me on Facebook, I haven't concluded yet, but I'm going to uh, expand my experience before I come back to the US and likely take more school in Spanish. But it's a tragedy. It's over for those reasons I stated and more. But at the same time, I'm happy that it has come to a conclusion, obviously in a very positive way. I did achieve Ushuaia. I was forced to do it in a very difficult way, which is even better because I appreciate it that much more. So ultimately, those are some thoughts that I had. I hope that I added intelligently to your day some thoughts on the highlights of my thinking. There'll be much more, I hope, as I process this massive journey. The number of hours spent, etc., was enormous. I didn't even mention the journey by boat when I slept on coconuts. By the way, I was in a grocery store and saw coconuts stacked the other day, and all I could think of was dirty feet walking over the top of them. I'm not sure I'll ever look at a coconut again the same way. I open up the floor to any questions folks might have, and I want to say thank you so much. The opportunity to have you along was genuinely a massive contributor to my success. All of the comments you took time to write, they all made a difference. I read all of them. At least that was my intention. Sometimes you can miss one. And I tried to respond too. By the way, the comments that have come in the last few days, I'm overwhelmed, but I will try to respond to all of them because I want to, but it might take a few days. And ultimately, don't tell the people I work for. I'm a software consultant if nobody knows that. And I have a small computer, it's sitting in front of me. And theoretically, I worked on this journey, and I did at times. But my clients have been incredibly patient, and I do need to dive in to that responsibility, even this evening, if possible. Responsibility does come back around, and it's a good thing. We all need to be responsible contributors to that economic space in our lives as well. So I open up the floor to questions. I'll glance down at my laptop here. Anna is going to deliver them to me. Forgive her, she's probably going to get inundated. We'll try to answer as many as we can up until about 2 o'clock. And honestly, if they continue after 2, it's fine by me. I will stay here. I said 1 to 2 just to bracket it somewhere, but I'm not going anywhere. Anybody who checks out, I love you. I truly do. I want to thank a few friends in my life for teaching me to tell my adult friends that I love them. Tanya, I don't know, I might have missed you dropping in. If Tanya's there, she was the one that first said to me, I love you, and I was a bit shocked. But I say it a lot now, and she is the source of that inspiration. So I understand when you depart. It's okay. I'm hoping this transcript will be available. Okay, and I'm going to focus on this first question, okay? Yeah. So my brother, Dan, I have 2 brothers, a younger brother and an older brother. I'm the middle kid, and he's married to my sister-in-law, Cooley, as she is known. And they asked the question, and it's the question that I answered earlier in my long-winded discussion among myself, since I can't hear you. Question is, what did you do physically and mentally to balance all the hours spent on the bike? Okay, so actually that's not the same. So physically is easy, not much, honestly, and that has been, and I think many will be surprised, and if my yoga friends and maybe even studios and studio owners, if any of them are out there, forgive me, my yoga practice goes almost to zero when I'm on these tours. My excuse, which some may think of as a reason in my defense, but I think excuse is after so much time spent problem solving, physically riding, and the impact that has on my central nervous system, brain in particular, when I get to the conclusion of each day, I am exhausted and I don't want to do anything else. I don't want any other list. Okay, now you must do this. I don't even want to stretch, especially as the journey continues and amplifies more and more days. So I only do something about the physical if my body complains loud enough. And it often does that for the first 10 days, especially when I begin a journey. So much so that I've almost failed on more than one occasion in the first week because, for example, Achilles in one foot in particular on my journey from the Colorado Front Range, Rockies, to New England. I called it Connecting My Grandfathers. You'll find that on my website. If you go to my website, andrebretoncycling.com, and if you could dump that in the comments for me, and then look for travel logs, and then below that you'll see all the journeys I've done by bicycle, and they are more or less represented. Some of them have complete travel logs. I wrote for months the entire story. My most recent journeys are that way, and I'm contemplating doing it for Climate Zero, which may be from Wilton for many months. I assure you, a massive undertaking. I'd also like to generate a video. I've been encouraged by my friend, whom I call Mr. Goodhue. Don't know if he's joined us, Terry Goodhue. He, by the way, was on MapShare more than anybody. I hope others got some use out of that, which tracked me by satellite every inch of the way. Let me show you that device. If you've never seen an InReach Mini by Garmin, there it is. And I kept it in the top tube bag of my bicycle. I'll leave it on, by the way, until I get back to the United States. So if you're curious where I am as these weeks unfold, you can use that. So physically, not much. Mentally, I suppose I'd have to say the same. I mean, other than respecting rest in both cases. So making sure I did not stay up late. I maintained consistency in bed and rise times. Never read about that. It's important for your biological rhythms. There are so many. We are rhythmic machines, it turns out, even if we can't hear the music playing most of the time. And I listened to that music, especially the central nervous system. So I took rests when they were undeniably necessary. I didn't take rest before that. There are a few exceptions, but generally I took a rest when my central nervous system screamed the loudest that it was time to stop for a day or two or three or four. I think I stayed in Cusco for 4 nights and 3 days, though that was partly because of logistics, not entirely because of exhaustion, though I was exhausted when I got to Cusco because I'd ridden for 7 straight days to try to close that gap. And by the way, mostly east. That was another factor of Peru. It rarely went south. So not a lot to reveal there other than getting rest when I needed it. A lot of folks might think I did a lot of stretching in the evenings, but I didn't. I just rested because I didn't want to do anything else. Now, let me add that in Ushuaia, I hope to begin my yoga practice again, which yoga is an amazing resource for your mind and body. I prefer hot yoga. There doesn't appear to be any here, but I will attend ambient temperature yoga in this town, hopefully not cold yoga. Plenty of cold here, if I have the opportunity. So James is asking, was there a bitter experience? Well, fortunately, no experience between me and another human comes to mind, if you can believe it. There were some cases that maybe went in that direction. I had some uncomfortable experiences on the journey by boat, including when the boat captain decided he didn't want to fulfill his promise to take me to another harbor, and so he had one of his crew put me on the beach in a village and leave me there. I was initially angry, so an opportunity to become a better human was presented for sure at that instance. But there was a lot to be grateful about even then, including the captain didn't charge me, and I'd been with them for 3 days, I think. That was the coconut boat, by the way. So no bitterness comes to mind immediately. There'd be some gray areas, and I look forward to staying at James's hotel in Delhi, hopefully in the next few months. And you should join me. It's a beautiful part of New York, Delhi, New York. Okay, the next question here. Vicky. Will there be a movie? Well, hopefully whoever plays me didn't have the sort of my gene structure not only grayed my hair when I was in my early 30s, but it obviously removed quite a bit of it too. Around the same time, in a very stressful 5 years of PhD candidate. Well, if you think the story is good enough for a film, I guess my first response is certainly thank you. Within my wheelhouse, which I should apologize here, my films are amateur. We all understand that, and yet many people have watched them, no doubt skipping through my endless commentary, most of us. Now, Kent, my good friend, aka Lumpy, he did watch, as far as I know, every second of my videos, but he may be the only one. I mention them because I have ambitions to make a single film, maybe 80 minutes maximum, or maybe even 20 minutes, that I could potentially submit to venues that would play such a thing. But my skills in this space are very amateur. In part, the software I use, by the way, if you're curious, UCut. In Texas, I abandoned my GoPro camera in favor of using only the 4K video and still footage from my Pixel 7 smartphone. And that way, all the footage was in one place, and I used UCut to build the videos also on the phone, that app. So all the footage is 4K, which if you know footage, that's the high. I think you can do 5K now. Maybe I'm making that up, but 4K is very high resolution, way above HD, by the way. HD is ancient history. However, when I published all my videos, they are published in basically HD because I was limited by infrastructure, Wi-Fi, or paying for gigabytes in all these different countries. We could have a discussion about how I manage SIM cards, etc. By the way, the Pixel has 2 SIMs. I kept my eSIM Google throughout it's still there, so hello, we're partly using my Google eSIM and swapped out the second slot, or the only slot, but the second SIM throughout the journey. So, a movie would be really cool. If I'm successful, I look forward to sharing it with you. But I must say that the conclusion of that desire is so far ahead of me. Maybe my friend Colin could help me. he's much smarter in that space. But anyway, stay tuned. That would be really cool. Ah, well, the most incredible sunrise that I saw, Jed. So tell us about the sunrises and sunsets that I saw on my journey. All of all of the sunrises and sunsets in Patagonia have been memorable. I haven't caught every one, but the most impactful was after most of 10 days of closing gaps through wilderness, gaps of 72 roughly to 145 or so miles. So by that, I mean, I'd leave a town, it'd be total wilderness for 100 miles or 130 miles, and then I'd arrive to another town. And the temperature would be about freezing or maybe as high as 40, couple of 40 degrees, 40, 45 degrees. And I'd do it again the next day and the next day and the next day. So I finally arrived to what by then was a big concern, and I had no solution that I liked. It was 147 miles to Rio Gallegos, the last town before you arrive to Chile. And from Chile, you ride 20, I want to say it's 26 miles, but thereabouts to the Strait of Magellan, and then you continue south from there. So Gallegos is quite far south. I chose one of my solutions. But keep in mind, it had rained for a week, and during that time, that region had accumulated the equivalent of a year's worth of rainfall. If you stepped off the road, you sunk 3 inches. So camping was very questionable. So I decided to leave 2 hours before sunrise. I was on the bike for almost 2 hours before an amazing sunrise, which happened behind me, of course. The sun has been behind me for some time now as I went south, and it cast a shadow, what must have been a quarter mile from my bike and body down the road. I stopped to appreciate that sunrise, and that would be the highlight of my sunrise sunset experiences on the whole journey. I can easily recall being on top of a mountain when I crossed on the track road past Gaff Topsail, a high space in the high country of wilderness in Newfoundland, a decision I made last minute to go over this old train track bed, the track road, the Newfies call it. The track is gone. And man, it nearly turned into my demise. But I met a man in a pickup truck with his dog sitting next to him, and he said, "You can stay with me tonight." And I stayed. I don't know if Larry Saunders is on with us today. He could very well be. He is a character. He opened up all of his cupboards, said, "Eat anything you want," and he went out duck hunting and then came back and cooked me dinner. The sunrise the next day in that space too was incredible. In part because, now this is a point I think I'd be very happy to make. When you challenge yourself, even to an extent that's much less than what I did on this journey. Obviously, it's one time in my life that this challenge is monumental. But challenges that force our physical and mental self to go beyond the normal. The result in part is when you come back from that challenge, backwards, you back away from even trying, everything in your life is amplified. I don't know why brushing my teeth came to mind, maybe because I'm a teeth care junkie, but all the simple stuff you do in life has more pleasure if you challenge yourself physically and mentally. And the harder you make it, the more of that pleasure you receive when, for example, you sit on the couch and sip a cup of coffee. It feels amazing. The last few days here in Ushuaia, I've been sipping kind of marginal coffee, honestly. Getting a medium roast coffee versus espresso in Central and South America, It's not always easy. In Argentina, it's been, so far I've failed. The espresso is amazing, but I don't have an espresso machine here, so what I'm making in the apartment is it's okay. But sipping it in the morning, I can't express how good it feels, and that's in part because when you do hard things, the normal stuff in life is amplified. So if you want to live your life amplified, which doesn't that sound good? All you have to do is make it hard once in a while. By being hard, it will amplify everything else in your life. So, for example, consider going into cold water safely. Use your shower, for example. There's a lot of that going on right now, and a lot of people, like my friend Amelia, they don't want to touch that cold water. But that cold water is one way to amplify every other experience in your life. Bradford, other than the finish and the tree planting, what was the highlight of your journey? That's a good question. And forgive me, I will continue to think about that. But what comes to mind immediately? Oh, that's trying to pull the best of the best is, I think, easily in the top three. I arrived to a village in Mexico, so a long time ago. It's my understanding that I can camp at what looks to me like a former monastery. I get there and there are animals being cared for and hay on the ground, and it's quite an extensive space. Very tall walls. You could not scale them without a ladder. Interior buildings, mostly for taking care of, for horticulture, for taking care of farm animals. I find a man and we have a discussion. It actually turns out, it seemed to me he did not want me to be there. So it was all quite confusing, even though online I read reviews of people camping there. I was pretty much convinced I wasn't going back when I left, even though I said, okay, I'm going to the grocery store to him and I'll be back. The grocery store was, I assure you, it wasn't a supermarket. Wish I could remember the name of the town, but I arrived to that shop in town, and almost immediately I met a woman, and she was she was on one end of the spectrum of a person who's willing to not only struggle to communicate, but get out her phone app and start actually translating. A long story short, she ended up, and her husband, bringing me to a place where I could pitch my tent, but she wasn't satisfied. She was concerned for my comfort and maybe safety. So she brought me to her father-in-law's house. They cleared out the chickens and the roosters from a room. They swept it. They carried a mattress in there and made me a bed. They then proceeded, maybe it happens every night, I don't know, but a lot of the family showed up. They made a meal outdoors. It was cool that night for sure. And I spent that evening with an extended Mexican family when I otherwise essentially had failed to find a place to stay on my own. That was a clear highlight of the tour. That experience with them lives in my heart to the day I die, and I hope someday that I get to go back and speak to them in somewhat fluent Spanish. That would be an amazing conclusion to that opportunity, which was one of so many, but it really turned out to be special. My friend Andrew wants to know if I could retire in one place on this journey, where would it be? I'm going to say Guanajuato in Mexico. By the way, Mexico keeps coming up. It's because Mexico, in part, was so intimidating when you may remember me sitting on the bed in Texas in a video saying, I am nurturing or something like that. I am waking my inner warrior, my peaceful warrior, in expectation of danger when I got over the border. So I went into Mexico intimidated, and that contributed, I think, to how much I absorbed there. My awareness was fully open, so that can't be denied. Nonetheless, I was asked recently my favorite country. Again, I'd love to work around the edges of that in-person conversation. I said Mexico, and the person was very surprised. So for Andrew, I'm going to say Guanajuato. It's a former colonial town, tunnels under the city. The city is modest but big, very modest. If you think city, you probably should think big town. The tunnels are so big, cars are driving through them. I descended into those tunnels on the bike. My GPS immediately turned off, of course, and I realized, oh shit, I don't know which way to go. And the road started splitting underground. I guessed, climbed a stairwell, popped up in the middle of the town. My GPS came back on, and I made it to where I was going that night. That is a magical town, Guanajuato, in Mexico. It's a bit north and west, quite a bit west, but easily a bus ride away from Mexico City. That's what I would choose. Vicky wants to know what my post-adventure transition plan is after the high of a huge accomplishment. Some have a crash into depression. So 2 parts. The first part, as I mentioned at some point earlier, I'm still uncertain what I'm going to do, though my primary thought has been for months to go to school for maybe as long as 3 months in Spanish. I will work half the day and study Spanish half the day to satisfy my professional obligations. However, I'm so eager to see friends and family after this journey that I'm struggling with the 3 months. So you may see me shorten it quite a bit. I looked at ticket prices for the first time yesterday, if you can believe it. That's how hard my journey was. I didn't even look at ticket prices to fly out of Ushuaia that does have an international airport, but the international is quite limited, so I can fly direct to Buenos Aires, and it's about $100, and then the bike too, so probably closer to 300. I wouldn't be surprised. So you may see me exit to Buenos Aires in the next 2 weeks. I'm 10 days booked into this apartment, or I may stay here longer, and I'm even contemplating getting on a boat and going a little farther south to a town where there are no roads, to Port Williams. Maybe. Again, I have to respect my obligation to my clients at this point more than anything else. If I do go to Buenos Aires, maybe I go to Uruguay too and study Spanish there in addition. But again, I'm eager to see friends and family and share my stories with them, and it would just be so much fun to see them at this point. I'm having a hard time keeping all that at bay. But I just add to this before I move on. Here I am at the end of the world, and should I rush back? For those reasons, I'm struggling, but at the same time, I have so much opportunity if I go slow, or at least slow it down. So that's my thoughts on that. And the crash into depression is very real. Every time I've gone on a long journey, I have slipped into a period of questioning. So I'm concerned because this is the hardest by far, the deepest I've gone by far, given my previous experiences. So I hope I am more mature in my inner warrior self, my ability to take note of what thoughts are arising from the ether. Our thoughts arise from the ether, right? You're sitting there, and the next moment a thought arises from the ether. That's not free will, that's something else. That's actually part of how the brain truly functions. And how you respond to it is very important. So maybe by now my maturity as a peaceful warrior is great enough to do better, but I am concerned of what's coming because of what I've experienced in the past. So unfortunately, I don't know the answer, but I am concerned. Amelia. She wants to know if I'll be buying stock in my favorite South American gas station, YPF. I should, you know, I've had no luck getting sponsorship from anybody. Of course, a gas company, given my feelings about climate change, would be a stretch, but not impossible. Look into YPF. I read a little bit about them months ago, and I want to say there's an algae story there, but anyway, could be making that up. But I spent the YPF gas stations, I think, also are government. Again, forgive me if I'm lying to you, but government Argentina owned and managed. But they're everywhere, including places where I could only camp. There was no lodging, so I slept behind one, for example. So they became a source of comfort, and inevitably I became very fond of them and still am. But I don't think I'll be buying stock in them anytime soon. Though it's an interesting idea. I do need to be concerned about my future self. I've not done a great job with that financially. That's really funny, though, Amelia. Thank you. Okay, they're popping in quickly now. Oh, no, here they are. Okay, that's it. So there's no other questions in the queue. So what time we got? 12:47. Amazing. What an organized bunch of people we are. Well, Ken said the three wise men show up. You'll have to talk to somebody else about that. Not sure. Thanks, Bill. I'll be well, I assure you. Rodney wrote the longest bike ride to school I've ever heard of. He is such a funny guy. He is super talented, and humor is one of his talents. I used quite a lot of dental floss, actually, Brad. I currently have 2 containers. Selfishness prevails in that space for me. Anthony, you've been a tremendous supporter throughout. Thank you so much. He's one of the people I just can't wait to sit down and debrief with. It's going to be so much fun. And the coffee coming out of Anthony and Susan's kitchen is amazing. I'm not telling you where he lives because I'm too selfish. My mechanicals. Okay, so we got a few minutes. I can talk about the bike. I haven't said anything about it. The biggest problem I had with the bike was with the most expensive component. A component is something that you bolt on basically to the frame and fork of a bike, generally speaking. Doug can correct me if I'm wrong there. Thanks to very talented people at a bike shop in Maine, the most sophisticated drivetrain, so front ring, crank arms, cassette in the back, and derailleur, the device in French, that the French term derailleur, that moves the chain up and down the cassette. All of that is the drivetrain. I bolted on, well, the very talented people in Maine at a bike shop called, let me think about it for a second and I'll tell you the name of the shop. They advised, designed in essence, and bolted on this drivetrain for me, all speed. Anything you need will be done professionally by Allspeed in Portland, Maine. Unfortunately, the drivetrain after 100 miles started to behave in a way that I lost 4 of the 12 gears. So 1 ring in the front, 12 in the back, so a 12 speed. I had to shift over and down into two rings, one high and one low. And to fix one by adjustment, it made the other one worse. So the best, after 100 miles, once the chain was worn in, I lost the ability to shift clean through 4 out of 12 years. The cost of the drivetrain was, let's call it $3,000. It's electronic shifting, so battery in the back on the derailleur and a battery in each of the shifters up on the handlebars. So much opportunity to be amazing, and when it worked well in those other rings, it was. But unfortunately, every time I put a new chain on, the first 100 miles, it shifted perfect, and then it would do the same exact thing, and it did that all the way from Texas into Mexico and beyond, until I got to Peru, and then in Cusco, a professional bike racer who owns a bike shop assured me that his parts, which were genuine SRAM parts as far as I could tell, that he was going to sell me, he could also install flawlessly, and I didn't doubt it. It turns out they didn't even cut the chain, which is elementary, by the way, elementary. And so half of the cassette was not shifting properly. So I went from a 12-speed to about a 5-speed, and a lot of frustration until I got to Argentina, yes. And a certified SRAM mechanic immediately discovered the problem, and he was able to get the cassette to shift perfectly, but within 3 days it was not working perfectly, but it was better than when I left Cusco. Okay, so that's a very long, and there's more to that story. But to answer Doug's question, the biggest disappointment mechanical-wise, and the only one really of significance, was the SRAM AXS drivetrain, the model that I purchased, and I think they might have a second version of that now. Doug, you can weigh in if you know the answer to that. It's all over the internet that there's shifting problems, that the derailleur is very sensitive. Of course, they don't tell you that when you lay your $3,000 down. So I'm a bit, okay, so there's a source of bitterness. That is the bit, actually, there were people, that's the bitterness right there. I dealt with the most expensive investment. On my worst day, I called it all sorts of terrible things. But let me say something positive. Any drivetrain that survived the journey, it still functioned at the end of the journey that I went on, that's worth something. It's worth a lot. Would I buy another AXS? Absolutely not. If they gave me one and said they upgraded it and all the problems are resolved, I would definitely try it. Let me just add to the conclusion of that story for Doug in particular. By the way, the derailleur stopped working many times in the super cold, and I was putting the batteries in my pockets, and I was stopping and tapping on the derailleur trying to get the battery to connect. I think after so many miles of vibration, the connection between the battery and the derailleur was starting to fail. That's just a guess. So right to the end, I had more problems with the AXS derailleur to add to my frustration. But again, I am so grateful that it did survive to Ushuaia, because I was just waiting for total failure, and it didn't happen. I hung the bike in places on my route and tweaked the shifting on my own, by the way, many times. Cool. Thanks for the invitation, Denny. Denny and a few others in his group met me in Eastern Canada, keeping it simple, more than one time. They are the longest standing, I think, communicators with me on this journey, and they've been just full of kindness and compliments and now invitations too. So cool to see come on here, Denny. I am going to take you up, universe willing, on that offer. You can be sure. Amelia asked, were you always holding your phone while videoing, or did you have something you could mount the phone to? On the bike, it was always in my hand. A few times I used the stand that it's sitting on now. So that's the third one. I broke 2 small tripods on the journey. This is the third one. And you would have, a couple of times I used it as a selfie stick, but I didn't do that very often for a lot of reasons. It's very problematic. So almost all the footage is me just doing this, holding it often in my right hand, rarely in my left hand. By the way, the Pixel 7, one of the reasons I bought it is the ability to capture a wider view, especially looking forward, not back. It went, the number's 0.7 maybe comes to mind. I've forgotten what that refers to, but you can capture a giant landscape with that number. What I'd love to see is a Pixel 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 that also provided that looking at the person holding it, and so I could see the screen and see me. It would have been amazing to have a bigger view, but that is only looking forward, relatively marginal looking at the holder. So off the bike, I used a small tripod, and I would use a strap. Show you. Strap like this one. These are amazing to have with you on a bicycle journey. This is a long one. I have shorter ones too. They do not come free. They're rubberized and they stick and they really hold well. I would strap the camera to various things like trees, or I'd use the tripod itself. But the tripods are so cheap that the phone tended to blow in the wind, and you will see some of that if you go looking for it. So yes, on the bike, I was holding the camera. Yeah. Yeah, Doug, the batteries, it's possible the batteries were failing in the cold, but I'm also not convinced it wasn't a contact issue from a million miles of everything moving just a little bit. So stay tuned. Oh, cool. Bubba's on, huh? Cool. Cool. My Anthony Carmignani, forgive me dropping the name. I won't tell you where he lives, but he's in New England. I have known Anthony since I knew myself. Our friendship goes back to the beginning. An amazing friend and an amazing human being. Thank you so much for joining me today, Anthony. It's a pleasure to have you on here. Looking forward to seeing you and downloading and debriefing. That'll be amazing. Yeah, Doug, it's a lot of micro vibrations, right? So I wonder if the touch points between the battery and the derailleur weren't just shaved enough. Bring out your microscope to cause the problem I was having. It would disconnect and I'd stop and move some equipment and tap on it. And if I was lucky, it'd start again, or I'd change the battery and it would behave. But it seemed the former was more often the fix as I got farther and farther and had the problem more and more. But it's speculative. It was extreme cold. The wind chill on the equipment was well below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Not nice. Anthony, I need a cup of your coffee, man. I would love a cup of your coffee right now. And I'm going to drink it selfishly when I see you, I assure you. And I'm going to listen to you laugh and love every second of it. April, so nice of you to drop in. Thank you so much. So Robbie's asking, will you do another talk before you depart Ushuaia? I haven't driven everyone completely batshit crazy today. I never anticipated anyone would want to listen more. I suppose if I got that impression, I could, or maybe I wait until I get to Buenos Aires or maybe even Uruguay, unless again I decide like, no, I'm going to Wilton. I'm done. I'm going to eat with my friends, wonderful dinners, and maybe drink a little wine because they keep inviting me, and honestly, I'm thinking about it when I sleep, I'm sure. Diane DeLuca, wow, another honoring moment for me. Diane, I wish I could have stayed with you. It almost happened, didn't it? On this journey, we made plans, I asked and you were busy. You were already leaving town. I have a terrible habit of last minute communication. Sorry to anyone who's experienced that with me. I'm a terrible last minute guy. But Diane, when I'm back in New Hampshire, you can expect me to try again. Thank you so much for dropping in. Bottomless pot of coffee in Maine awaiting me. Got to be careful with that. There is a limit to the coffee you can drink. I've unfortunately pushed on that limit a few times. Well, Robbie, that's cool. I'll keep that in mind. As I process my thoughts, I'll have more refined things to say. You're right. Yeah, I'll definitely keep it in mind. That's not only very generous of you, I'm not surprised to suggest it. It's a good idea. And I want to stay in that cabin down the hill, Diane. I was thinking about that when it didn't work out. So you and Stephen, if there's no one in there, I'd love to stay there and check it out. Maybe I'll do a little writing in there too. Everybody, amazing. Thank you so much I can't thank you enough. I know I sound almost like an old style record that's bouncing back to the beginning, but your kindness expressed in all the ways you expressed it did make a huge difference in my outlook at times when I was low. I loved reading your comments. To know that people appreciated the video content, it just inspired me to try to do a better job and honestly, I probably would have captured half of the footage, but instead I knew you were watching and appreciating it. And so even when I otherwise didn't want to shoot, and a great filmmaker once said, and I noted it, you have to film when you don't want to film. But that's easier said than done. So you all encouraged me from so far away, so many times. And my friend Kent, aka Lumpy, commented last night when I was talking to him and Anna that he felt bad for me that I had to ride the same section multiple times, for example, because I was setting the camera up in a tree or attached to a roadside sign and on and on. But I did that for the effect, which everybody appreciated. So I should have got off the bike a lot more. One might argue a lot more B-roll should have come from this guy, especially when he got into the cold wilderness of Patagonia. Cool. Okay, I booked the cabin in New Hampshire. I'm in. I will stay here for as long as folks are online. Once everybody's gone, I will contemplate my next move. Thanks, Bradford. I am resting well. At 7:30 this morning, 8 o'clock yesterday. Wow. Kent is proposing that I made a large impact on those that followed. The highs and lows were an inspiration. The Truman Show experience, which I must dip into. He's using that as an example a couple of times now. One thing I miss on these journeys is I'm not aware of the habits of my friends, etc. I'm just not aware of basically prime time even. I often ask my good friend Andrew to fill me in on world affairs. He starts from the beginning because he knows I don't know any of it. Truman Show. And I think the Truman Show is dated now too. Huh? The bike is in the background. Maybe I'm gonna unplug my phone and I'm gonna bring it closer to the bike Since people are still here, I'll keep talking until everyone goes away. You see, I've hung some of my gear from the television. I hope Bradford will forgive me. None of it's wet, I promise. My latest kits, they're from Pave. I know nothing about that company, but I can tell you that Pave makes an excellent bib. That is the bib right there that I bought at a bike shop. Excuse me. I bought that at a bike shop. I'm hoping the name of the shop will come to me because they were excellent. In Tucumán, Argentina. In the absence of that bib, I might fail. That bib was that important. I feel compelled. I'm going to say something about that raincoat in a second. My brother Dan, big brother Dan, whom I love and look up to, he has inspired me since I was a very small kid. Since I arrived into awareness, my older brother Dan has been challenging the edges of the norms of society. He's a brilliant artist, and any medium he touches turns into something amazing. He's also very humble, so everything I say he will try to deny, but all of it is true. And his wife Cooley is an amazing inspiration as well, not only an exceptional human being, but an artist too, and also now into martial arts and has gone so far. I'm very lucky to have brothers that and sister-in-laws that challenge the borders of their potential and go farther and farther than anybody else might anticipate. They are an inspiration for me every day. My brother Dan's latest thing is weightlifting, by the way. You should follow. He's a power lifter. You should follow him on Instagram. He's no off button ever with dots between. Right, Dan? It's dots or underscores. No off button ever. And I think it's Eva, E-V-A-H. Find him on Instagram and you'll appreciate his humor and also his accomplishments as a weightlifter. Oh yes, the raincoat. See, Kent's weighing in some more. Thanks, Rodney. It's such a pleasure. Thank you for dropping in. I can't wait to reconvene with you for a lot of reasons. It's been too long. My nose is acting funny. Okay, so that raincoat back there, also absolutely crucial. And by the way, I'm moving so much because the text is in my face. I'm trying to see between the lines. If you ever try to do something that I did, be sure you have raincoat that is made for cycling so that hood goes over the helmet comfortably, and then I can zip it, as you saw in my videos, to here. By the way, I can't wait to get my beard cut off at this point. It's just too long. It'd be nice to be rid of it. Hair too, probably. We'll see. It's quite cold down here, though. But that raincoat was critical for my success through the cold weather. That's my ground pad, by the way. It's the second one. The first one failed. Early on, I was in the Appalachians, but it's the heaviest thing I carried on the journey. And you might say, well, look, Andre, at least the last couple of weeks in Argentina, why didn't you abandon it? A few reasons. One, well, abandon would mean, ditch it, and I'm too my desire to see planet Earth saved is too strong to just abandon something of value like that. So I could have maybe shipped it, right? But I'm telling you now, shipping on my journey was never a great option once I left the United States. Most likely never going to see the item again. So I didn't do that. Instead, I decided to keep it with me. And for what purpose? If I had to camp on those last couple of weeks coming through Patagonia, and I didn't have that, if you've ever heard of the R factor in insulation, if I tried to lie on the ground, and by the way, I didn't have a sleeping bag, I had another system, but not a sleeping bag, I wouldn't have survived the night. So that item was for emergency. I kept it with me for that reason, though I hated carrying it, I'll be honest, but it also survived, unlike the first from Big Agnes, which I paid full price. I communicated with Big Agnes and they ignored me, basically. This has been my experience throughout. I've never had any success. Niner Bikes, unfortunately, they've given me an amazing discount. Back in 2019, when I bought that bike, they gave me an amazing discount. So they have done me great kindnesses, but they've never fully embraced me as an athlete, etc., that they want to sponsor. So I've asked many times, and I think by now I'm giving up. So Big Agnes also totally ignored me and my ideas. So I paid full price, but that mattress held up. The first one failed very quickly, and it was also expensive. For what it's worth, if anyone wants to know more about my equipment, you can send me a private message, etc. Bill Allen, cool. You're very much welcome. Cool, grateful. He's also shares some of my opinions. That's great. I don't want to be lying to the world. Do that too often. Oh, yes, Jed, thank you for reminding me. I must say, Jed, there he is, McIntosh, Colorado, keep it simple. And my roommate and friend, Jed, also a dear friend by now, thanks to Troy, who introduced me to Jed and Michelle. Michelle, an amazing woman. Jed, I think, was responsible, or Jed and Troy, for nicknaming my habits as the Andre way, how I navigate in the world. And it happened right around the time that I put a bunch of banana boxes on Craigslist, I think, offering them to anybody who needed them, for example, for moving or storage. If you've never encountered the banana box, you're in for a treat. Go to the grocery store, beg for one, and bring it home and, for example, put books in it. And I guarantee you the box will never fail, and you can carry a lot of weight in it. Well, I had banana boxes from 20 years old, from when I was moving around much more. And what happened was Troy overheard me talking to the young people that I was giving the boxes to, expressing my desire or asking them to be sure to recycle those boxes if in fact they weren't going to use them, or even better, give them to someone who could use them. And that gave an impression, positive one, and Jed even began to share my thoughts in that space with his children, which is a huge compliment, of course, to me. So, Jed, thank you for the reminder. The Andre way, you know, if I ever write a book, I've considered that as, if not the inspiration, I mean, maybe even the title. I think maybe an editor would take it away from me, but it could inspire the entire story. Andrew, I'm not repeating that. So I did express to my friend Andrew that the sheep in the country of Patagonia, they're robust, big-headed sheep. And also, I am just so impressed that those sheep live here in Patagonia, where the wind blows ferociously. I did have plenty of, we didn't talk about the wind, viento in Spanish, by the way. The wind here, of course, Patagonia is famous for it, if you haven't heard. The wind here is brutal. The bicycle gets, as I said at the opening, high scores. Niner really got the RLT model right. It continues to be a performer in the gravel bike scene, and so I would encourage anybody to take a serious look at it if they are considering a gravel bike. That is the race edition of their Niner gravel bike, so it's carbon fiber, not steel, sorry. I did tour on their steel bike, but I broke the frame 4 times, once in Bulgaria. Because not the bike, well, I guess you could complain if it's a bike, but the the panniers that I was affixing to the bike had something to do with it. I changed my setup quite a lot, which would take us down a very deep rabbit hole. So I'll just say that. And this is what's allowed me to tour on a carbon fiber bike, which, by the way, that bike loaded, depending on the day, the water, the food I was carrying, something like 60 to 80 pounds, bike and gear. I always tried to keep it close to 65-ish, but say you're going into a campsite with groceries at the end of the day, then it might be 80 pounds, but I'd go a short distance that way. Let's see if anybody else had something to say. I could be talking to myself by now. I don't know how to determine how many people are there. Well, I think I'll just, with that in mind, I will conclude the session. Say thank you very much, everybody. In a moment here, I'm going to click the finish button. If anybody has questions, etc., I tell you what, I'm going to do something right now since we're live and it's all my friends and family, strangers that I just hadn't met yet, and on and on. If anybody wants to personal message me by text message or WhatsApp, my WhatsApp and my cell phone number are the same. It's 970-779-2401. 970, that's Colorado, 779-2401. You can get me on WhatsApp. If you again have questions, if you're attempting if you have something that you'd like to do in your own life and you want some encouragement or advice, feel free. I'm in your debt to reach out to me through that personal way. And otherwise, someone's making an espresso. I'm jealous. Someday I'm going to have a home, which I've never had, by the way. Always rented or lived where I worked. I've lived out of a tent for years as a professional seabird guide. So I assure you, I've camped my share in life. It's a privilege, though. So is a warm space. Yeah, so cool. I love you too, man. I'll see you soon. I hope so. I'm considering coming back to Fort Collins to play at least one more season of soccer with my over 50, used to be over 40 buddies. I'm an indoor soccer player, at least I used to know how to play. I have to learn how to play again. You're welcome, Ken. A pleasure. I wish I was there too, Robbie. But I think after I hang up, I might go down to the coffee shop and get myself a cafe con leche, which is a espresso with hot milk. Basically call it a cappuccino. Grande. That's the size. We will see you, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking care of that truck. Anna, we'll do a debrief, huh? I'll be in text conversation with you here shortly. If you have to go, though, don't worry about it. But we have another conversation coming when I'm more rested for sure. Thanks, brother. Yeah, when I noticed Uruguay was just across a narrow bay from Buenos Aires, it really got me thinking, like, could go to one more country before all this is over. Learn a little more Spanish, or a little more would be good for the guy who didn't learn enough. Bye-bye, Cooley. Can't wait to resume my presence in your kitchen and your gardens and etc. And to see you and give you a hug, of course, but your cooking is exceptional. And yes, I will go to the bakery and maybe eat a whole loaf of bread and see if I can shock them a second time. Diane, lovely to see you too. Deering, that's right. Well, I'm pretty sure, but I'll double check. I think I set a save on Deering with a heart, of course. So you're screwed now. I know. It's It's not a very big town, so I'll just go door to door until I find you. Yeah. The granola that comes out of Cooley's kitchen, for example, I don't dare touch it, but when I have, oh, it's delicious. The girl makes the nicest granola for my older brother. He is so spoiled, it's incredible. And my younger brother, essentially the same. Those two have such an opposite of me. I take care of everything on my own. They don't have to. Cool. Not hard, yeah. Go to the village center and take a left. Deering. I can't remember if I've cycled there yet or not, but I do like to explore from Wilton on my gravel bike, and I've gone quite far. Amelia and Brad can confirm that. If you've never explored the gravel roads of New Hampshire, do it. Do it. It's amazing. Southern New Hampshire in particular. If I can call Deering Southern New Hampshire, it's kind of pushing it at that point. Well, Sherry, cool. You were there. Nice. Yes, me too. Excellent. Excellent. It's going to be the return to Maine is obvious. Well, I'll tell you now, it's going to be a highlight for me. Wilton, the community of like-minded seabird folks and artists, etc. in Maine. Obviously, seeing my parents, they've been concerned about me, obviously, as you might anticipate. I'm looking forward to that too, and more. But the trip to Maine will be special. I'll be smiling, and my heart will be feeling really good even before I get there. Thank you. It seems that my friend Mr. Goodhue maybe didn't get on today. He's on Vinyl Haven, by the way, a wonderful island where folks are fishermen or artists, etc., and live out there. I didn't see Sue Schubel either. I think Susan is offline exploring the woods of Manitoba. I wish there was a clean way of knowing who had signed off or not. Well, everybody, this is the final countdown. 10 seconds. I'm going to walk away from this space feeling even better than when I started, and I felt damn good as everyone popped in. Thank you for an amazing opportunity to share this with you. You really, the compliments from your appearance are just going to be there with me burning for days. It's wonderful. Well, that's it from the end of the world, and a man who rode his bicycle over 17,000 miles to get here. Incredible number of experiences, some of them uncomfortable, but ultimately contributing to the person I hope to be someday. My goal is to be a good human, and I'm a little closer to that now after all that hardship, and hoping to achieve it before the conclusion of my days. I encourage all of you to go down some of the paths that I have if you're not there already, and try to be the best person that you can be. I think we owe it to friends and family and the future folks that will come from all of them and others. We'll certainly discover a better place if somehow we can come back and do it all again. That'd be neat. That's it from Ushuaia. I'm going to hit the finish button. 10 seconds to respond if you want any last minute answers. 8, 7, 6, going. I love you all. Ciao.